Hey folks, Fernando doing our video for Modern Survivalists. In this case, we're going to be talking about improvised weapons. Before I go on, I want to mention a couple things. I'm going to be doing a live stream today, 4 p.m. Central Time, as I've been doing every Sunday. So if you want to check that out, you are more than welcome. Another thing is, a lot of the things I'm going to be explaining here, I have explained quite thoroughly in my book, Street Survival Skills. And I have a dedicated chapter, in fact, specifically about improvised weapons and armor. So if that's something that you may be interested in, you definitely want to check it out. So yeah, basically most of the things I'm going to be explaining here, I have gone through quite in detail in the book. It's going to be available, a link for it in Amazon somewhere there below. So let's get to it. This is a question I get pretty often in terms of folks that maybe don't have a firearm because of legal reasons, of the country in which they live. They simply do not have guns. Guns are, of course, your best self-defense weapons. There's really no two ways around this, just the way it is. But having said that, many times we think that everyone has a gun. Well, not always. A lot of people that like these sort of topics don't actually own any firearms. They just don't have them. Again, reasons, maybe a number of them because of their age restrictions, legal restrictions of where they live, economic reasons, whatever it is. I get this email, and this is something I get in Instagram a lot. Now that I'm using it more, I'm getting more messages, and one of the messages I get more often in Instagram, which by the way is Furfile308, is, hey, how about air guns or an air rifle, or what about this weapon or a bow and arrow? Questions I get a lot. So, which ones are the best improvised weapons? These are all improvised weapons. These are things that are not specifically weapons. And yes, you may be thinking, oh, you have a Glock there. No, that's an air pistol. It's and it depends on the legality and which country you live in. But in most countries, based on my research, in most countries, when they are in that power range, they're not even considered weapons at all. Not even air guns or air weapons. So all of these things that are not intended to be used as weapons could potentially be used as weapons. So which ones are best? It's not always as straightforward as people think. You see on TV a lot, someone picks up a golf club or a baseball bat and they use a typical Hollywood movie. They have a baseball bat. Well, let me tell you this. I don't know if you've ever been attacked with a stick or a bat. It is really not as easy to cause incapacitating damage with a bat. If you learn to manage the distance and you close the distance very fast, it is going to be depending on how effective that blow is, a lot of strength, a lot of great timing from the person using that bat. Not nearly as easy as it seems, and it's quite easy to get on top of someone and take that bat away from him if they don't have enough strength. They're not so sure about what they're doing. That's the type of weapon that really depends on the physical strength of the person using it. So if you are a person that's big or stronger than your attacker and he's empty-handed, then you probably don't even need a bat at all. So my opinion is really not that great. Now, the first thing you may be thinking, okay, but you have an umbrella here. So what's up with that? Well, an umbrella is actually a pretty neat, pretty effective improvised weapon. Not because of how effective it is. As I'm just saying right now, if you're going to be using this as a baseball bat and hitting people with this, it is really not going to be all that effective. It may dissuade people. Sometimes you see, on the news that someone had a baseball bat and the attacker took off. Well, that's maybe because the person was not as decided in terms of continuing that attack, and they just decided it's just not worth it. They just took off. It's not because of how effective that weapon is. Even if you have used, and guys, you have to keep in mind that even if you had some experience with any kind of weapon, or you have quite a bit of experience in your life, maybe you're a soldier, maybe you're a police officer, and you've had a couple incidents in which you use a firearm, a gun, a knife, a baton. How many times could that possibly be? 1, 2, 5, 10? That is really, statistically speaking, doesn't speak of how effective that specific weapon is. It gives you an idea, but you want to have larger numbers. And one of the things you see when you do this seriously is the amount of times in which a bat or a golf club was effectively used so as to stop an attacker that had intent. It is really not worth writing home about. It's just not that many cases. So going back to an umbrella, the advantage I see with this is, first of all, you can actually have it with you all day long. That is an advantage, a great advantage compared to most other improvised weapons. You can actually have it in your hand ready to use. And as I'm saying, it's not as effective hitting, as a blunt weapon. Here you have a metal tip, and that is likely to be a bit more effective if you stab and poke and use it as a spear with force. This is a stronger than your typical umbrella. I actually took this to a London trip, and I actually have it with me in the plane. No one can say a word about it because it is really just an umbrella. So fiberglass rod with a metal tip, yeah, that could be used somewhat effectively as an improvised weapon. Not the best, but yes. One of the other typical things you see mentioned, brought up quite often, is the tactical flashlight. Oh, you're going to be blinding people with these things. In my experience, I haven't had lots of success with that, and based on the different situations that I've read of people using it, I haven't really come across anything. I cannot think of a single case in which, yes, my attacker was blinded and he retreated away because of the flashlight. Would I try to use it as a distraction? Yeah, sure. It's just not as effective as some guys out there make it seem, right? Have it with you, yes, a bright light. If you have your pupils, your eyes are nighttime and you just flash a very intense light, yes, could distract someone. But how effective, how confusing that is often overestimated. Then you have strike bezels. This is a crown with a sharp teeth, and these are somewhat intended to be used as weapons. And I know at least of one guy that used it quite successfully, a police officer, just bring it down, smashing someone in the head with it. It can be quite effective if you do that, but it's strictly related to how strong the person wielding it is. So you need a good strength of your own, a strong arm and pretty good physical strength so as to use this to its full potential. If not, weaker person, smaller frame person that's not all that strong may struggle with this, using it effectively. Okay, someone in the same line, you can even use a can of tomato or soup, just holding it right and smashing someone over the head with it. A lot of these things, a lot of these improvised weapons, guys, are strictly related to how determined and strong-willed you are and how bad you want to damage the other person. If you are, having second thoughts, if you're not all that committed, yes, if you have, maybe not that much of a physical strength, it will not be nearly as effective. But most of all, especially with bladed weapons, it's all about commitment and how bad you want to use that and how bad you want to win that fight. But yes, something like this, you can smash someone over the head and you have a pretty sharp metal edge. Metal is good. Whenever you have metal in a weapon, that's why the baseball bat is, it's this thing of, not so great. And sure, you can have an aluminum bat, but it's more of a rounded and doesn't have any sharp edges. The thing that works with flashlights and with something like this is the sharp edge will cut and will more easily crack bone if you concentrate that energy in a smaller surface, right? Of all the things I have here, the thing I actually used to kill something was the crowbar. Long story short, well, it wasn't that long of a story, but I was just there in the basement, saw something run past me, was actually a rat. The thing I had handy was the crowbar, and I just hit it with it, and yes, sure enough, it killed it. Crowbars are heavy, metal. One of the things that the baseball bat doesn't have is this thing has sharp edges. And of course, you can hit someone with this and cause a serious amount of damage with this part because it's going to be, cutting through skin and cracking bone more easily. So using it like this, using it holding like that and stabbing with it almost like a spear or pike or some pokey metal thing, yeah, you can do a lot of damage with a crowbar. If you start hitting with it, again, this thing about using it as an impact weapon. Impact weapons, you need a lot of range and timing so as to use it efficiently. The sharp parts a bit more effective, at least in my opinion. a screwdriver, typical criminal tool used very often and sometimes quite successfully. They use some of the bigger ones to break into homes, and they use them in many places as a weapon that is kind of hard to catch a criminal with from the legal standpoint, because if a guy has a bag with a hammer, pliers, a couple screwdrivers, he can somewhat argue that yes, I'm just looking for a job, man. I just got a call and it was just seeing if I could get paid and seeing if I could make a few bucks. And it's kind of hard to nail someone that has a screwdriver unless it's a very suspicious situation, but it's not as straightforward as with an actual weapon. Having said that, long shaft metal, and this can be quite sharp. I mean, for the average guy, if you want to have something like this sharpened, that's going to be making it quite a bit more effective. It's going to be penetrating, and it's going to be becoming like an ice pick, like a stabbing tool, and that can be very effective. Someone breaks into your house, you have nothing else, you have a sharp end, and you can actually put a little bit of an edge there. Careful with that. If you modify this, for example, this screwdriver as it is, straight out of my toolbox, this is just an improvised weapon, because this is not intended to be used as a weapon, but the heat of the moment, I pick it up, use it as a weapon. That is understandable. Now, if I'm a criminal out in the street pretending to be an honest, law-abiding citizen, and I have this, and I sharpen this, and I use it as a weapon, and this falls in the hands of forensics that don't know what they're doing, the first thing that they would do, which is the first thing I would do if I was in their shoes, would be get a magnifier, take a very nice long look, and see if I see those scratches of a grinding wheel or sharpening process, and then yes, this screwdriver was modified beyond its original form, and it's been converted into a weapon. You use a screwdriver and made a weapon out of it because of your manipulation. You turn that into a weapon, and now you're going to be going to jail for a longer period of time than if you have just done it with an unmodified tool. That is, of course, depending on the legality of where you is, and this, of course, changes from one country to the other, and even the amount of luck that you have, depending on judges and that sort of thing. But just interesting. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you want to have your screwdriver and you're sharpening it a little bit more, that's, of course, perfectly normal. And if someone breaks in, that's that. But it is definitely something that could be used as an improvised weapon. Another improvised weapon that I actually mentioned in my book is a bag with some pocket change, so as to go about your business, pay for stuff. This is simply a bag with pocket change. At the same time, the physics of it are pretty much like a zap or blackjack, which has been very favorable for law enforcement in the United States in the 50s and 60s, and beyond that too. It's one of the oldest weapons created by mankind. They soon realized that if you make somewhat of a flexible long shaft with weights, with a rock or some lead in one of the ends, you can use that very effectively to transmit a lot of energy. The physics involved are, of course, complex, but basically when you have something that's like leather, that's somewhat flexible and weighted on one of the ends, the amount of energy that you can deliver is surprisingly significant. You can do a lot of damage to someone, hitting someone with this, especially in the head, over the head, because it's kind of easy to crack someone's skull, even with less amount of strength. Usually what happens is the opposite. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm hitting this guy with this baton, with this stick, with this bat, and it's not as effective as people think it's supposed to be. This is the kind of thing that, oh, I just give him a little whack so as to calm him down, and accidentally you crack the guy's skull. Effective, yes. Illegal everywhere, yes, absolutely. Those are great things that this kind of thing has going for it. But it is, a very limited range, at least this one is, and you have the disadvantage of you need some room so as to move this and wield this properly. Not an ideal, but not nearly the worst improvised weapon. This is actually kind of pretty effective, and I recommend this where people have lots of restrictions. This is everywhere in the world, just a bag with coins, and it can be pretty effective. In terms of blunt weapons, you have your hammers. A hammer, looking at different instances, hammers have been used pretty effectively over the years as weapons. The hammer has a few advantages. It's metal, and you have somewhat of a limited surface of contact, and even with a little bit of an angle, that area is going to be even less. With a hammer, it is kind of easy to cause a lot of damage, especially when hitting the head with it. Hammers, large war hammers have been used for as specific weapons, but even your typical carpenter's hammer can be used as a weapon on either side. But even with this, you can just do quite a bit of damage. I think that if you're going to be using it as a weapon, the axe is even better because you have a sharp edge, and an axe is by far more popular in our history, being used as a weapon. Axes used by Normans, the Frank axes by Vikings, somewhat not all that different from that. Your short handle axe or a tomahawks would have a smaller head, wouldn't be as large as that one. It's going to be a shorter cutting area, lighter, easier to wield with a longer shaft. But axes definitely are a very good improvised weapons, and they can be used very effectively, especially if you sharpen it well. Sometimes these axes are not all that sharp, but with a little bit of work on your own, if you sharpen it properly, it can be used not only as a blunt weapon, but also that the cutting ability of the axe makes it a formidable improvised weapon, even though it is simply a just little axe to have in your tool shed. Something else regarding the zap, blackjack, that sort of thing, your rigger's belt. This is the kind of belt, the tactical belt that you use for shooters and that sort of thing, like these kinds of belts, because they're pretty sturdy. Now, if you wrap this around your hand, you can actually use it very effectively as a zap or blackjack or something else, because it has more knocking power than your typical zap or blackjack, because with this metal buckle, it is going to be cutting quite easily. I actually tried this in a watermelon. It just slashes through. I have the video there. It's maybe a few months ago, but I did a video about using this on a watermelon. Melon. It just cuts through a watermelon like an axe. Just a very small surface, metal, and that flexibility that you have here, just boom, cuts very nicely. This is surprisingly effective as an improvised weapon, and you can do a lot of damage. Even just a couple slaps like this, that hurts like hell, just doing like this, barely, and let alone hitting hard with the smaller surface of the buckle. Man, it is a pretty solid improvised weapon. One of the other weapons that maybe is not all that improvised is your entrenching tool. Entrenching tools are used as weapons, and there's in the field manuals in different countries. The U.S. field there's a U.S. field manual where they explain how you would be using an E-tool as a weapon, so you can slash with it. Especially this NATO type of shovels that have like a sharp edge here and here. These can cut quite nicely. They are intended to be used as axes, and you can saw with this part over here, but they're pretty sharp, and then especially you have a nice tip, so as to be used as a digging tool to cut and cut your way through harder earth and such. But yeah, this can be used as a pretty solid weapon. There I have the Spetsnaz shovel. Cold Steel makes a shovel. I think they call it Special Forces shovel because it's from the Spetsnaz Special Forces. And those guys practice with these things like crazy. They just use them as weapons. They throw them and just go like throwing knives. They bury into large pieces of wood. Surprising the kind of damage you can do with a sharp shovel. And this is no exception. So, as an improvised weapon, yeah, definitely something you could use quite effectively. Then you have stuff like this. Yes, this doesn't seem like much of an improvised weapon, but it is. And let me make my case for that. What do I mean by this being an improvised weapon? Well, it's a chef knife from IKEA. Man, it is a big knife, pointy, absolutely. But this is something that no one buys with the intent of being used as a weapon, unless maybe a criminal would buy it and use it like such. But it's very hard for any if you end up using this to defend yourself, you pick this from your kitchen drawer, a judge or jury would have a very hard time justifying that you had this deadly weapon in your house and you had ill intent and you use it to attack someone that broke into your house. Someone breaks into your house, you go to a kitchen, pick up the biggest knife you have. That is a very solid case in your favor in terms of, yeah, man, I just used the first thing that came to mind and I was scared, and this is the first thing that came to mind as of me looking to defend myself. I'm talking about most countries that have very strong restrictions. Guys watch this video from all over the world. Some places where having a firearm is nearly impossible. If you go for something like this in your kitchen, this can be extremely effective. And I explain how to use this in my book. Specifically this type of knife with a proper grip. You can have different grips, of course, with knives, but more of a defensive stance, a very close range, kind of like your reverse grip, and keeping it close to your body. And you can flip it up so as to, anyone that's trying to barge into you, you can defend yourself pretty quickly, and it's not going to be cutting yourself. So this is pretty good. But a big kitchen knife is definitely one of the best, more effective improvised weapons you can have. I'm going to be doing a video specifically on knives because it is a big topic, but I don't consider, fighting knives, bayonets, those are not improvised. Those are specifically bladed weapons. This is a cooking tool, right, that could be used as a weapon effectively, but it's not its original intended purpose. Then you have something I get very often is this idea of, hey, I want to get like an air gun because I cannot get an actual gun. What air gun would you recommend for self-defense? I just don't recommend air guns for self-defense. I just don't think it's worth it. Most people that think that they cannot legally buy a firearm, they live in places where some kind of gun is legal if they care enough to get it. Talking about getting a shotgun, if all you can get is a double barrel shotgun, that is going to be way better than using any of these things as an improvised weapon. In this case, it's a Glock BB gun, which I like because I can use it for practice, for training, very cheap, and it's the same form factor as my actual Glock, so it's very similar, and I can practice and see if I'm shooting and hitting what I'm shooting at, and the shape being the same, the mechanics and the muscle memory with my real gun is going to be the same thing as with this. So that's a pretty nice advantage. Now, using this as an actual weapon, man, no, just no. An air gun, it's going to be firing a small pellet, and I mean a small, something like this. Even with your typical 12 gauge, it's going to be firing hundreds of pellets of that same size at a much faster speed. It's going to be a lot more effective. Yes, there are, with something like this and the right PCP gun, air gun with a good amount of power, you can hunt. But hunting is not self-defense. If I'm shooting a wild pig through the ear or just hitting the brain with surgical precision, that is not self-defense. Shooting someone with this in the chest, even though it may go through that person, through the skin and penetrate and even end up killing someone, it is not going to be stopping that person immediately. And effectively using something like this against a human being means that you have surgical precision, that you're hunting that person, not self-defense. Self-defense is something else. And if you're talking about the real powerful air rifles, man, you're talking about air rifles that have 30 caliber, very powerful guns that are very expensive as well. Just doesn't make sense. Just get yourself the proper papers and get yourself a shotgun. It's going to be a lot better than going about using a hunting air rifle for self-defense. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this little video of mine and got you a few ideas. This is all based on quite a lot of research that I do for my videos, but also for my books as well. If you're interested in this sort of thing, do yourself a favor and learn how to use these things properly. Even better, get yourself an actual firearm. But if you can't get yourself an actual firearm, here I explain how to use a number of improvised weapons and how to use that effectively. It's going to be, it's going to be a good addition if this is the kind of thing you are interested in. And remember, today, 4 p.m. Central Time, going to be going live here on the channel. See you then, and if not, have a great day. See you on our next video.